evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morgan, Roth, the Motor City Madmouth, along with David Levin, and we have a brand new guest on tonight, Geoff Magliocchette. How did I do with the name, Mr. Magliocchette?
Perfect, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you on as well. Looking forward to having more opportunities with you, but this is a first good act since we were talking motorsports. And David, I'll tell you what, I didn't realize you were much of a motorsports person until just recently, and now here we are, NASCAR night, the only game in town over Memorial Day weekend. So, David Levin, take it away. Well, before you do that, Geoff, why don't you introduce yourself and let everybody know what you do?
Yeah, sure. I am from Wayne, New Jersey, North Jersey to be exact. Graduate of Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Go Red Foxes. I used to actually play football, but at some point I realized I was a lot better at writing about the game than actually playing it. So now I cover NASCAR, football, and women's basketball for several sites, including Elite Sports New York, Empire Sports Media, W Insider, and a plethora of others. So happy to do what I do and doing what I can with what I got.
Well, we're glad to have you on, and obviously, hopefully, this will provide you with another outlet to go ahead and take your exceptional writing skills and bring them on the air. So we're happy to have you here on the WSAN network for sure. All right, with that said, David, since you're a baseball guy, why don't you lead off?
All right. Thanks for having that. Thanks for being on, Geoff. This is really exciting because I am a NASCAR fan. I don't talk about it much anymore because I don't cover it like I used to. I used to be in Darlington and covering it up there, which, as you know, is great NASCAR tradition. I want to start off that this is really the only game in town right now that is live. So it's a major breakthrough, if you want to call it that, with everything going on with the coronavirus pandemic. Mm-hmm. What were your impressions of Darlington and the fact that it's live, but it's not really NASCAR? You know, there's no fan involvement. But what is your general impression of how that went?
Well, I was really impressed with what they were able to do with the races. I thought it was really well done. I thought everything was handled very well. I was glad to see that they were able to keep the general spirit of NASCAR racing. I will say, based after last night's race, after the Toyota 500 over in Darlington last night, I was glad to see that we're still social distancing. Otherwise, there might have been a bit of a brouhaha in the number 18 pit, and we'll get to that a little bit later, I'm sure. But I was glad to see that they were able to cover that, and Talks did a fantastic job. I think it speaks major volumes to the skills and talents of Mike Joy and Jeff Gordon, in the sense that you would never be able to tell unless you saw them at the start of the telecast that they were broadcasting the race from a remote location. They were commentating, observing it on it, and whatnot, with, of course, Regan Smith serving as a pit reporter. You would never have been able to tell that Mike and Jeff were not at the track, pretty much. So I thought that was really well done. I thought they did a fantastic job with the coverage. I thought the race itself was very well done, because let's face it, if there is a sport you can socially distance in, it's NASCAR, and they do a great job over there, and I'm eager to see what the future holds. And something that really impressed me was basically the number of viewers that tune in. I believe there was a tune of 6.23 million viewers for the race, and they got another 2.5 million for yesterday's race on Wednesday. So that's 8 million people right there. That's fantastic. And I think a lot of these leagues now, any team sports league that is looking to make a comeback in these trying times, now has a blueprint. Because we've seen, I saw there was a PBR, Professional Bull Riding, they came back too. UFC also made a comeback. I think that was in Jacksonville, as a matter of fact, so you'd be familiar with that. But I think NASCAR was the first team sport to return from all this, because NASCAR, it's not just the driver. You got to have the crew chief, you got to have the car, you got to have the technicians, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the hauler drivers too, et cetera. And obviously you cannot have a properly social distance race with all everybody at the track. But this is going to provide a blueprint, per se, for the NFL, perhaps. Like maybe a team whose coaches sit up in the press box, maybe they can perform their duties remotely and not have to actually be at the stadium. So I think that, there is a blueprint now. I think every sport should be taking note of this, and it's great to see that NASCAR is not only doing this, but they're doing it efficiently as well.
All right, well, you actually answered 3 of my questions in one, so I really appreciate that. But let me dance around a little bit, so indulge me for a second. Like I said, I've covered this before, have really great memories. I was one of the last people to see Earnhardt at Darlington before he passed away. Mm-hmm. There are things that are etched in my mind about the history and the heritage and how great the sport is. It's changed.
Yes.
And as we know, NASCAR is predicated on fan involvement, and every NASCAR driver is a walking billboard, and they're a sponsor, and they're a this and a that. And fans show their love for their heroes by wearing their jackets and their shirts and waving their banners and, having the bumper stickers on the car and everything that goes on there. How does NASCAR take what they did last week and the Coca-Cola 600 that is coming up this coming week and continue to get the fans to be just as charismatic and involved as if they were at the race themselves?
Well, I was actually writing about this recently. It's a column I plan to have up in the next couple days or so, maybe even tomorrow, as a matter of fact. NASCAR's Sunday debut, the Real Heroes 400 over at Darlington, that was almost like a television pilot, in the sense that, you had to establish the characters, establish the protagonists and whatnot, and I think NASCAR did a solid job of that. We cheered when, Jimmy Johnson took the lead. We got to know Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s propensity for getting into accidents, sometimes through no fault of his own, as he couldn't even get to the first lap. So we found out, there's that. We found out some catchphrases from NASCAR, too. I'm sure many fans found out for the first time what exactly having a tight or loose race car means for the first time. So things like that. So all in all, yes, and a lot of people, I think, really took to it and said basically, hey, I would like to see more of that. So then we get to the next episode, which is on Wednesday. And, that time we got to see our antagonist in Kyle Busch. Now, obviously, Kyle, we're talking about the Chase Elliott incident. That wasn't Kyle's fault. I'm sure it was inadvertent, but at the same time, it had just enough of that trademark Kyle Busch snark to, to establish him as the villain, as the instigator of these events. So I think once you can build around things like this, Kyle Busch is good for the sport and all sports in several ways, because right now he's in a situation. He's the type of guy. He's the first quote unquote love him or hate him case we're going to see in quite a while with sports. Sports are almost predicated on the love him or hate him type guy, and we've seen it in so many cases. We've seen it in Duke basketball, for example, and we've also seen that sports can truly thrive when you have a villain that embraces his role. Like, look in the NBA, for example. Miami, LeBron James, he embraced that role and even used it to his advantage in rehabilitating his image once he got back to Cleveland. The NHL has Brad Marchand. The NFL has New England Patriots. The MLB has the Houston Astros. So I think that if you have a villain who accepts his role in that, you can truly succeed. And NASCAR seems to have that in Kyle Busch, in the sense that he's just apologetic enough to not be truly hateful, but at the same time, he truly embraces his role and can move forward with this. So you're going to have that. And NASCAR has done a good job in establishing some characters, I think, at this point. Fans got to know who Jimmy Johnson was when he was leading at the end of the first stage, and there was a sense of grief when he crashed at the end of the first stage during that incident with Chris Buescher. We got to know Ryan Newman as well, making that comeback from that awful wreck at the end of the Daytona 500. So there's another great cause to root for right there. Matt Kenseth, I think, truly solidified his Hall of Fame case on Sunday, because this was a guy who never ran this package, who came in here with zero practice, zero qualifying runs at Darlington, one of the toughest tracks on the circuit, and still managed to roll to a 10th place finish. So if there was ever any doubt that Matt Kenseth was a Hall of Famer, it was eliminated on Sunday with a 10th place finish. Appropriate, too, because that's how he won his title back in 2003 and necessitated the NASCAR playoffs in the first place. So I think that NASCAR has done a great job of making some guys, giving us guys to root for. We saw all kinds of feel-good stories around the track at Darlington on Sunday and Wednesday. We saw, Tyler Reddick. He fought his way back and finished 7th for the first top 10 of his full-time NASCAR career. We saw also John Hunter Nemechek, son of front row Joe Nemechek, come in, and he raced to a 9th place finish in some subpar equipment. And I think that was Front Row Motorsports' first top 10 finish at a non-restrictor plate track, aka Daytona Talladega, since 2017 when Chris Buescher did in the 34 at Bristol. So I think that NASCAR has done a very good job in giving us cases to root for. I think that's only going to change on Sunday night. I think that's only going to continue, on Sunday night at Charlotte, because NASCAR is really a sport, too, that really prides itself on its history, and there's plenty of history to go around in the Coca-Cola 600 or the World 600, if you so desire, because I think that, it's the longest race on the circuit, and, you're going to need some of these cases sometimes, because we've seen so many times before, the pace of play discussion, how long are the games and whatnot. We see baseball, if a baseball game goes a minute over 2 hours, people lose their ever-loving minds, so who knows what's going to happen with the Coke 600 on Sunday, how long that's going to go, and if it scares anybody off. But at the same time, people want sports right now, and NASCAR is picking up the slack in major ways, and they are truly capitalizing, I feel, on a major opportunity.
Okay, that's because you hit a lot of coverage there, a lot of landscape, and I appreciate it. Getting back, I'm going to backtrack a little bit when you were talking about character, and we have heroes and villains, and that's always been the case in NASCAR. Mm-hmm. Joe Yarborough and back in the 70s, and to some extent Dale Earnhardt, in his heyday, because he didn't have a problem, putting Terry Labonte, in the middle of the infield to win a race.
I meant to rattle his cage.
I'm sorry.
I was just quoting. I didn't mean to wreck him. I meant to rattle his cage.
Yeah, there are certain people that you love to hate, and that you love them because they play the villain role. Kyle Busch, to me, is a part of that 1980s culture. He is a throwback driver as far as, it's that smirk, it's that badass attitude. I know that I rile the crowd. I know I can hold. It's like a villain in wrestling where he controls what goes on in the match. Mm-hmm. So I love that stuff. But getting back to that, because I covered it in the 90s. So I was there when Jimmy was coming up and Tony was getting his start, and Earnhardt was still a big deal, and Jeff Gordon still looked like he couldn't shave. And all of these, and then you still had Terry Labonte, who was out there, and Nemechek, who was, competing on a daily basis. And yes, Dick Trickle still had the shoes, and he was, out there in his wingtips running around track. Mm. How has NASCAR changed? Because the drivers are younger. Their name recognition isn't as great yet as it was. What is NASCAR doing to give these guys the same kind of spotlight that the guys that set the tone had then?
I think they've really been playing into the sense of nostalgics, because and it makes 100% sense. I always say that, you look at the box office numbers over at the movie theater, about 9/10, I'm willing to say 9 out of every 10 movies you see ranked in, say, the top 50. So that makes what? 41, 40 of the top 50 movies, maybe even more. I'm going to say at least 40 of the top 50 grossing movies of the year, maybe 90 of the top 100 are what? They're either sequels, they're reboots, they're prequels, they're whatever you want to call them, rebootquels, whatever. And look, enough can be said about, where's original ideas anymore, but that's not the point. Here's the point. Here's what the point is. NASCAR is embracing the same route. We see it all the time. We see it in particular over at the Southern 500 over at Darlington, where everyone breaks out their retro paint schemes and everyone just has a good time with it. Ryan Blaney breaks out the mullet and the mustache and whatnot. It's overall a great time is had by all. And right now, NASCAR is in a sense, they are in a position where they need to do what they can to compete with other sports. Like, for example, the most important races of the year, the 10 most important races of the NASCAR season, aka the playoff slate, are run smack dab in the middle of football season, which is such a behemoth that it needs to dominate every single month of the calendar. So that's something you have to do to stay relevant right now. Now, NASCAR has been provided a gift by being a silver lining right now, in the sense that they are the only team sport that is able to operate in the ages of social distancing and of the coronavirus. So what they're doing right now, they're really trying to market these guys at this point. They market these guys as, they play on that sense of, descending from royalty. Like, for example, we've seen Chase Elliott. We've really played up the Dawsonville, Georgia angle, and how he's the son of a NASCAR champion, the son of Awesome Bill. We've seen William Byron. Can he spill it? Can he at some point live up to the potential of the iconic number 24 Chevrolet for Hendrick Motorsports? We've seen Austin Dillon. Can he finally capitalize on the potential shown in the number 3 car, which was brought out of retirement for the first time in forever? And anytime we see a small-time driver rise to the occasion, what's the first question on everyone's mind? Could he take over the 48 next season? So I think NASCAR is embracing their past while preparing for the future. And all the while, it's making for an exciting product in the present. So I think NASCAR's embracing of its past, of its roots, have really been beneficial to its current success.
Okay, let me change gears then a little bit and talk about success. In the late 90s, early 2000s, NASCAR was white hot.
Yes.
And everybody capitalized on it. The NBC, ESPN, ABC, whoever it was, did a great marketing job where they made these guys rock stars.
Yes.
And then it kind of tailed off a little bit. And I don't know whether it's because, and I do think it had something to do with the fact that Earnhardt passed. And the fans that were diehard Earnhardt fans, Dale Jr. was great, but he never won the big one. Mm-hmm. And I think that there was so much put into that. But you had other drivers like Jimmy and Tony Stewart. Ryan Newman won 8 races one year. Those guys stuck around, and it still had a following, but it wasn't as charismatic. And then you started seeing numbers dip, and race teams lose sponsorships. Mm-hmm. And we all know that everything is predicated by money. The sponsorships aren't what they used to be. So what will these teams, whether it's Hendrick or it's, whatever group you want to call it, Tony Stewart Haas Racing, what are we doing to make sure that these sponsorships keep going? Because they aren't the same ones like they were in the 70s and 80s where you saw Skull and Bandit and Cheez-It and, whatever, food item or, multi-purpose cleaner there was that was on these cars.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think the days almost of associating one driver with the sponsor are almost gone at this point because, look, seeing Jimmy Johnson drive the Ally Bank car, it's going to be like what we're going to experience when Tom Brady is at Tampa Bay Buccaneer this fall. It's what we experienced when we saw Michael Jordan wear a Washington Wizards jersey. Even Miller Lite has even toned back their iconic sponsorship on the number 2 Ford of Brad Keselowski. You rarely see the Miller logo on the car anymore. But here's the thing about that. I also think that the economic downturn in the mid-2000s, that did not help NASCAR in the slightest at all. I think a lot of teams and a lot of sponsors started to, try to in an attempt to curtail their spending a little bit, started to stray away from unnecessary expenditures. So I think that the economy didn't help that much, and I think that there were a lot of fans that felt that NASCAR was being a bit neutered a little bit in the sense that they wanted to slow the cars down, and that was done in the name of safety, obviously. And I think there are some people who simply don't take kindly to that. And look, it's entirely their decision, of course. It's a free country, and it's what you do. It's what makes America the nation it is today. So I think that that certainly didn't help in the sense at all. But I think they were able to start to generate some new buzz. We've heard so much about what's going to be known as the next gen car, the Gen 7 car with a new aero package and whatnot. I think that's going to start to bring people back. And, I think that let's face it, success is the way to do it. By the time, Lowe's walked away, Jimmy Johnson hasn't been to victory lane in quite a while, has he? So I think that, I think also another thing that scared people away was the idea of the charter system, where the top 35 owners' points are automatically invited to the race. Because we used to see days where, you could go to a qualifying event and there was a chance that your favorite driver might not make the race. That chance is next to nil now. And I think that, I think some fans were scared away by the playoff, too, which I highly disagree with. I think the NASCAR playoff is a quote-unquote necessary, and I use this term for lack of a better term, necessary evil. I don't think it's evil at all, personally. I think you need that type of system, especially when you see the way that Matt Kenseth ran off. By the time, by the time we had the playoff, I believe 4 of the final 5 Winston Cups that were awarded were settled by the time we made it to the final race, the exception being 2002 when Tony Stewart held off Mark Martin over Homestead. So I think that several fans, they were angered by the abandonment of traditions, and that scared them away a little bit. So I think they're slowly starting to come back now in the sense because, again, NASCAR has started to embrace their past a little bit. I think that's going to play in NASCAR's favor.
Dude, well, let me ask you this. It's becoming a younger man's sport.
Mm-hmm.
No Jeff Gordon. Jimmy's at the end of his career. Tony Stewart's gone. Kenseth comes out of retirement. I don't know how many more years Ryan Newman's going to do this. So who becomes the flag bearer? I mean, who's the guy that is going to carry the torch and lead the new generation? And we're going to get excited about it again, and hopefully ratings will go up, and, everything will be great, and, God love NASCAR.
Mm-hmm. I think that Kyle Busch would hold the title, at least in the immediate sense, when all those guys depart. But I think right now the driver being best groomed to pull that off would be Chase Elliott, because once again, he has everything you're looking for. He has he has the almost type of, for lack of a better term, quote, good old boy attitude. He's just mild-mannered enough to get excited. He's a fantastic racer. He's consistent enough. And, of course, he descends from royalty. Not only does he descend from royalty, but from NASCAR royalty, that is. Not only does he descend from NASCAR royalty, yeah, I know, but not only does he descend from NASCAR royalty, but he lives up to the hype. Because how many times have we seen drivers? How many types of drivers have we seen turn out to be nothing? I'm old enough to remember Casey Atwood being labeled as the next Jeff Gordon, for example.
Right.
And, but he, on the other hand, has lived up to that and has done a fantastic job. So I think that Elliott would be the top contender to do so. Austin Dillon could be that guy, but we just haven't seen. He's one of the type of guys that hasn't lived up to the hype. Austin Dillon could be that guy, but he has not lived anywhere near to the hype. A win at Daytona, and a win at the rain-delayed Coca-Cola 600 does not make you automatically worthy. A few mileage win at Coca-Cola 600 does not make you automatically worthy of the 3 cars. So I think that he could be someone, but he drastically must improve for that to happen. I'm sure there's other guys if you go up and down the list. Kevin Harvick, I know it makes me feel so old. The guy won his 50th race, so I'm going through the drivers in my head right now and who could potentially take over. Tyler Reddick is certainly someone who could, because let's face it, he's driving the 8 car, and all those Dale Jr. fans need something to do with their old 8 Budweiser gear. So maybe they could do that for that reason alone. But there's several guys I think could realistically take up the mantle. Ryan Blaney is another type of guy, not NASCAR royalty, but he is the son of a former driver and Dave, and he really has embraced, Ryan Blaney, I think, has really embraced the sense of NASCAR that makes it truly fun. He really, he's a bit of a goof. We talked about it before, the mullet, the mustache and whatnot. So I think Ryan Blaney could certainly be in that spot as well. Clint Boyer also established himself a very solid fan base during the iRacing segments where NASCAR maintained a presence on the American sports fans' imagination via simulated races on the iRacing platform and the eNASCAR Pro Invitational iRacing Series. So I think Boyer really became a name that people got to know. He's almost like I call him in casual conversation, I kind of refer to him as the Pat McAfee of NASCAR, because I think he's the type of guy that's he has fun. I know he has sponsorship from Barstool. I think they were on the car during the iRace at Talladega. So I think that Clint Boyer really could, depending on how long he races, I think he could potentially gain a few fans and potentially become a face of the sport. I think for sure he will be in the Fox booth next to Mike and Geoff as soon as he decides to hang up his fire suit. So Clint Boyer is definitely a name I think could be a prime candidate for the face of NASCAR moving forward. But right now, I think those faces are the ones you saw last night: Kyle Busch and Chase Elliott.
Real quick, and I know that Scott has a few questions for you, so I'll ask a few more and I'll switch over. Dale Earnhardt Jr., was his career successful or was it a failure because he didn't live up to Dad's legacy?
I mean, here's the thing about Dale Earnhardt Jr. Dale Jr. was a guy who drew so many eyes to the sport. It's too outlandish to call him a quote-unquote legend, but at the same time, it's too cruel to call him an underachiever. Because let's face it, when you're going up against Dale Earnhardt, the Intimidator, the driver of the number 3 Chevrolet, that guy, unless your name's Jimmy Johnson or Jeff Gordon, your career is going to pale to him every single time. And I think Dale Earnhardt Jr., as a matter of fact, is one of the biggest cases of what might have been in recent sports memory, alongside guys like Brandon Roy, Tony Romo, and Robert Griffin III. Because in the sense, he reminds me of Romo the most in the sense that it felt like just as Earnhardt was starting to hit his stride, things started to go downhill in terms of injuries. And we saw it happen because you look at his finishes over his final years, he was consistently a playoff driver, and it just felt like, just as it seemed like he was getting it together, the injuries started to happen. There was that year, I think it was 2014, when he won his last Daytona 500. First 3 races, he finished in the top 2. And he complimented it later. And then just as he started to get it going, there was just a hard wreck, and he missed the entire 2016 season. You go back to 2016, he finished in the runner-up spot 4 different times, and then the injury struck. He ended the year before on a solid note as well, and winning the Phoenix race and finishing in the top 5. But again, it was the injuries. And I never like to call guys who are injured busts by any stretch of the imagination. This is why in the NFL draft I've gained, I gained some raised eyebrows, because I don't consider guys like Sam Bradford, Steve Entman, or Kajana Carter busts, because this is a violent sport, and they just happened to get to Earnhardt at the wrong time. Because let's face it, did he live up to the hype of his family name? Probably not. Did he fulfill his true potential? No, like we've been talking about, he couldn't get to the championship. But he did, however, establish this sport as a national power. He brought people to this, his iconic number 8 Budweiser Chevrolet, and he was just talented enough to live up to the hype and give the people something to root for. So I don't want to call him, a legend of the sport, but he's the type of guy that definitely changed the sport for the better, and I don't think that's arguable.
All right, Scott, you there?
Oh yeah, just listening to you guys. You guys give me a lot of great ideas. So Geoff, you ready to take what I got for you?
Fire away.
All right, Scott, close the door, Scott.
All right, looking forward to this one, Geoff. All right, let's talk about some rivalries. Jeff Gordon, Tony Stewart, Dale Earnhardt. I used to love the Gordon Earnhardt one, and I used to love the Gordon Stewart. Those guys are awfully nasty, didn't they?
Oh, man. I mean, look, growing up, bit of a story. I was a big Jeff Gordon fan growing up because, long story short, I thought it was awesome that there was cars going 200 miles an hour, and technically he had the same name as me. And I was completely unaware before anyone brings up of Jeffrey Bodine. So, but technically he had the same name as me, and later on I saw that Jeff was driving a Star Wars car. He did that in the Bush series during the in 1999 when the Phantom Menace came out. So I was, I had to be a fan at that point. So I was always big on that. But yeah, that's the thing about NASCAR today. You don't see the rivalries that were so prevalent in the sport in the 90s. And, maybe yesterday's incident between Kyle Busch and Chase Elliott was something that could restart that. You see occasional get-togethers like the ones we saw between Martin Truex Jr. and Joey Logano at Martinsville a few years back, cost Truex a spot in the championship 4. And I think that, too many of these rivalries are one-offs these days. And I think it's hard to maintain almost a little bit in the social media era because, you have to be on your best behavior. Everyone's after you and whatnot. So I think that, we need to get some rivalries established going again. And they're not alone. I say it all the time. I mean, just look at the NBA. Everyone's always shaking hands, high-fiving to tip off and trying to recruit each other to play. Hey, come here. You can play with me. No, come here. Play with me. We'll win a title together and whatnot. So I think that, we need to start reestablishing long-term rivalries and avoid the condition of one-offs again. And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination, like, go out there and play Demolition Derby. I'm not suggesting that by any means. I'm just saying, we need to have some sort of genuine rivalry on the track again, I think, for the long term.
Geoff, you really led me right where I wanted to go. Thank you very much. Being from the Metro Detroit area, and growing up during or covering the Pistons during the Bad Boys era, I love the Detroit Pistons, Lakers, Celtics, Bulls, the Bad Boys. And I think you're right. When you talk about that, and of course I remember any time the Red Wings were involved with the original 6 or the Red Wings against the Colorado Avalanche, nastiness is what we need. I remember the old love tap when Gordon gave it to Earnhardt, they'd get it back, and then of course, Gordon and Stewart didn't really quite like each other for a while. Of course, they got to respect one another. And I think that's the one thing that sport definitely lacks. But the NBA, when it got physical, instead of playing the patty cake baker's man version of it, old school basketball, to me, it was a very good comparison to what we're talking about. Because I think you're right. The rivalries really do have to come back instead of, what modern day sports is all about. In fact, on all levels. No,
you're right about that. I mean, there needs to be rivalries, but at the same time, like you said, respect has to be there. I think the perfect example, I mean, we were just watching, The Last Dance for the past 5 weeks, and I think we saw that on several levels. I think we saw it, too, between, even beforehand, when, between Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. They hated each other on the court, but at the same time they respect each other, and we saw those rivalries grow throughout the process of The Last Dance, and many of them were able to be put aside for the Dream Team, but at the same time many were glad to see that Isaiah Thomas didn't make it. I'm not saying we have to have soap opera levels of drama going on in all this, but at the same time there needs to be some intensity and there needs to be some recurring incidents in a way. And that could really start to get this whole thing going and really start to trend NASCAR in the right direction, even when the competition reemerges in the form of football, in the form of basketball, hockey, baseball, etc.
Well, mark my word, Geoff, no Christmas cards were exchanged between the Detroit Pistons and the Chicago Bulls, and I lived it for those years.
Oh, trust me, I know all about it.
What's that?
Trust me, I know all about it.
I'm sure you do.
I've seen enough of it, and let's face it, between you and me and Dave, I'm in desperate need of a social life. So,
gotcha. Oh, that's funny. All right, so here's a question, Geoff. Geoff, do those iRaces count in points, or were they just there for makeshift entertainment to keep interest?
No, those were there purely for entertainment, okay. And they didn't even keep standings for the races themselves. I know that they basically said, if we did keep standings, then Timmy Hill would have won it. But at the same time, no, there were no standings kept for that. You will not see Timmy Hill in the playoffs at this point unless Timmy Hill somehow stumbles into the race and into the top 30 in points. Sorry, Timmy. But at the same time, I think that those were very good. I think that not keeping standings was for the better because it was just for fun. It was just something to make America feel normal again at a time we desperately needed it. And that's why I think we should continue to talk sports in a way. It brings us a sense of normalcy any way we can. And, I think people just need something to take their minds off the chaos, if only for a short while. I'm reminded of, I'm not sure if anyone watches The Office, but I'm reminded of the episode when, it feels like Dunder Mifflin's going down, but Michael decides to play the murder mystery game. And, I think that, if only for a short while, people need some levity. And NASCAR's iRacing initiative certainly did that. And I think it accomplished its goal. People were watching, and people continued to talk about the sport while they were in a hiatus. And, of course, not everything was perfect. Not everything was perfect by any stretch. Some races just delved into cautions every other lap, and there were some hurt feelings. I know Daniel Suarez bumped. I think it was Kyle Larson in one event, and of course, speaking of Kyle Larson, we saw that incident play out, and he's rightfully not in the sport anymore. So I think that I think that. Yes, I think that it was good for the sport, and they did not keep points, but because at the same time they were able to maintain that sense of fun. And I think if drivers were fighting for points in it, if they knew that they were fighting for points in it, they would not be able to maintain the sense of fun that was absolutely vital for this project to truly take off.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. When a driver goes on the unemployment line because of an iRace, that's not the kind of attention that you're looking for, but nevertheless, what he said, and we'll deal with that another day, was certainly something that shouldn't have been said, and it's a very expensive mistake for him, that's for sure. So
no, I mean, let's face it. He's definitely one in terms of the sports world. He's one of the biggest losers of this pandemic because he lost his job entirely. And he had talent too, so it's a shame.
Right.
But what he said was unacceptable, and the way he said it, you get the sense like he didn't mean anything bad by it, but at the same time, it sounded like he was saying, "Hey, stupid" or something like that. But that's the word you use? Are you kidding me? There's so many words in this language that you could use to call someone to call someone as a joke, and you use that. That's unacceptable.
Oh, yeah.
And you know what? I think that, he will eventually work his way back into races. I think Denny Hamlin said recently after he won the North Wilkesboro race that he does envision Kyle Larson eventually returning to the track. But it sickens me to see that people are saying, free Larson, bring him back. You want him to get away with no punishment for this? Unacceptable.
Right.
I think that it was justified, and we'll see if he earns his way back.
The one thing I don't like about the sport is they have these stages, which has me confused. I don't believe in staging up. Just let them race the amount, and whatever happens from start to finish does. And to me, I know NASCAR likes to play around with the sport a little bit. Stages, one plat to the other. I'm sorry, Geoff, that doesn't interest me whatsoever.
I was skeptical about stages at first glance because I was like that too. I'm like, look, they don't need to be like the other sports. They don't need halftime or anything. But at the same time, I think it's for the better because here's the thing. NASCAR is the type of sport where, you do need, and baseball is almost the same way because, let's face it, the attention span of the new generation is shorter than others. And while I looked at it first, I'm like, why are they catering to the fan that can't go 20 seconds without looking at his phone? I wasn't a fan at first. But at the same time, I think it's good because it adds some weight to the early portions of the race. No longer on, say, lap 67 of 300 are you going over to the kitchen to get a snack. You're watching the 10th place battle to see who gets an extra point. You're watching that battle for 6th, who gets an extra point when it comes to the end of the race. You're waiting to see who takes the lead. And some of the drivers are responding well to it. You're seeing drivers compete on lap 67 as intensely as they are on lap 267. So I think that stages, while I was skeptical at first, I think stage racing works. It's not perfect science by any stretch. I think, for example, we should not be counting the laps run under caution when the stage ends because we're eliminating 10 laps of the race right there. We could easily be using on intense racing and whatnot. And believe you me, it could create some commercial sponsorship space as well. At the same time, though, I think it is well done. And I was skeptical at first, but I've come to accept it and think this is a good endeavor for the future moving forward.
Well, let's not kid ourselves, okay? NASCAR is dependent on that TV money or they would have gone broke. That's why they're able to get away with the no fans. And we know full well that, as I just mentioned, if they don't have the TV money, they're headed for bankruptcy or some serious financial problems. What are your thoughts about the fact that it is so dependent on TV money? And like you said, they certainly captured an audience, and they're able to retain their sponsors, so it's not a total loss. And yet they are drawing much. I think they'll probably draw better numbers ratings-wise than they ever would. And I'm wondering down the road if that's a sign of the time. You definitely need fans, but they're making the best of a tough situation, using that TV money to survive, or once again going broke.
I mean, let's face it, with the fans, we've seen these other sports. I've read we've seen college football. They're probably going to need fans at some point. The NFL is probably going to need fans too. There's detraction from the MLB saying they would lose, something in the billions if they lose fans as well. But here's the thing about fans, in the sense that I think I saw an article in the New York Times the other day. I saw something along the lines of, is sports without fans still must-see TV? I was like, yeah, of course. That's why the heck not? Because the fan experience, look, obviously I'm not going to deny that, sports is better with fans. Like, how many games have we seen with just the crowd reaction? How many college basketball games have we watched where people go absolutely crazy and it adds to the excitement tenfold? At the same time, any time a fan experience, quote unquote, influences the game, it only does so in a negative sense. Talk about the malice at the palace, talk about, the Steve Bartman incident. It only affects it in a negative sense. And I think it's a solid business model for NASCAR to be able to get by TV money and be able to do this where, in case of an emergency, where you can have fans in the stands, the show can still go on. So I think it's good. I think it's a good, solid business model from NASCAR from that perspective.
Well, I'll tell you this, Geoff, I was ready to cover the 12 hours of Sebring, and I plan to do that later in the year. But without fans, they can't run the race because the tickets are so reasonable, and you have a lot of great drivers that appear at IMSA. And the 12 hours of Sebring is one heck of an event. I don't know if you've ever been to it, but I think it's one you need to get to at some point.
I have not been there, but certainly something on my bucket list, and would love to know your experience once you make it there.
Well, I've been there once, and I'll get you hooked up with Ken Breslauer, so don't worry. Should you make your way down to Sebring, mark my word, we'll have a good time chatting in person. And it took me a year to the first race to learn endurance racing and all those people, but I guarantee my sophomore time, I'm further ahead of the game. It definitely is a bucket list for you for sure. Now, let's talk. You talked about Mike Joy. I actually met at MIS Ken Squire, and I actually took a photo of Ken, and I'm going to tell you something. He's one of the greatest announcers I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of great, iconic announcers in a lot of sports. Tell me what your thoughts are of Ken Squire, and then the second part of that question is, how would Ken Squire calling a race these days under the virtual setting?
I'm going to be honest with you, Ken Squire's a little before my time, but at the same time, I've heard some good things, but I think that, he would call it very well. I think that, I think Mike does a fantastic job, too. We were talking about, I think at the top of all this, how you could barely tell that Geoff and Mike weren't at the track, and I think Ken did something recently. I could be wrong, though. I think he called part of the Darlington race a couple years back. And Ned Jarrett, too, did, as a matter of fact, too. But I'm excited for his sport. I think it would take some adjustment for Ken, from what I know about him anyway. It would take some adjustment for him. He would have to get the terminology right and whatnot. But that's something I think that the broadcast did extraordinarily well. They did it very well on both the virtual circuit and during Sunday and Wednesday's races. It's as if they knew that people who would not normally tune into NASCAR were tuning in. So there was a lot of more exposition, I guess you would say, in show business. But I think they did a good job there, and I think Ken would do the same. I think, look, he was a lot to live up to, of course, but I think Mike Joy does a fantastic job. And look, I grew up in the days of, Mike Joy, Larry McReynolds, and Darrell Waltrip. Boogity, boogity, boogity. Pull those belts tight one more time, that sort of thing. So they're the voices of my childhood. And the other guys I really came to respect back in the day were the guys on NBC, and Alan Bestwick, Wally Dallenbach, and Benny Parsons, and R.I.P. Benny. But Alan Bestwick, I saw him calling the Hawaii Bowl on Christmas Eve a few years back, and it was jarring to hear him not call a NASCAR race. So I think that, I think Ken would do a good job, basically, to answer your question about that. He would really adapt well to the virtual setting, and he would be very informative, and I think he would be able to get the hang of it, too, because he was really able to adjust on the fly, from what I remember about Ken.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to mention that thing before my time, because that definitely shows some of the gray hairs of my wear and tear, for sure. So, yeah, Ken was great, but yes, indeed, the age factor.
I'm glad
came
you
into
said
this
something,
broadcast.
Scott, because I was going to say the same thing.
Right. But yeah, thanks for Geoff for verifying the fact that we were going to use the age card at some point. One of the guys I always liked growing up watching it was Buddy Baker. Buddy Baker was unbelievable. He really was.
I'm not going to say a word. Not saying a word. Look, come on. Look, all I'll say is this. I grew up with the EA Sports NASCAR games on the PlayStation 2, so that's the extent. That's old school for me. That is old school for me at this point. I mean, I look back and I see, Tony Stewart racing in that orange number 20 Pontiac with the Home Depot on the hood, and I'm like, that was 20 years ago. I look at myself, I'm like, wow, I'm old. So I'm right there with you. Albeit with different names in the slots. So I just want to say I'm there with you. And no, by the way, know that I meant no offense.
Oh, I wouldn't worry about it. I thought it was actually pretty funny, really. I don't. Hey, Geoff, I don't take nothing. No, just because my birth date is 1962 and yours a little bit later, it's no big deal. I don't care.
Try 3 decades later.
What's that?
Wow.
What's that? I didn't catch that. I
said try 3 decades exactly later.
Well, point taken. Okay, so with that said, okay, the Indy 500 is going to be postponed to September. What are your thoughts about that? Because and will it have the same meaning as it did over Memorial Day weekend?
Oh, I'm sure it will. They do a great job turning out there for the Indianapolis 500. I think that it's going to be a nice little couple of days for Indianapolis. There, they move it to September. Perhaps the Colts will be starting their season. Perhaps we can slowly start to prepare for Indiana basketball. We're going to see the Pacers come back. Butler, too, as a matter of fact. So who knows? But at the same time, I think that should it keep that September date? And I'm fairly optimistic. But then again, there's a reason I'm talking sports and not science. I like history class, not science class by a stretch. So I think that I'm very optimistic, and I'm optimistic that fans, should they be invited, will turn out for the event. So I'm not as fully well versed in IndyCar. I'm fully well versed in NASCAR. That's my quote unquote claim to fame. I don't think a day went by in high school where I didn't have the debate over NASCAR was a sport. It is, by the way. But at the same time, I think that the fans will turn out. I found out that IndyCar fans are almost like hockey fans and WNBA fans, in the sense that the fan bases are nowhere near how big they should be. And NASCAR fans are like this too, as a matter of fact. Heck, all types of racing fans, especially in America. They are almost marginalized by systematic obstacles, the WNBA in particular, but they're very passionate and they're very knowledgeable. They know about their sport, they know their drivers, they know their history, and I have no doubt if fans are invited back by then that they will turn out at IMS for the event in September. Nothing will change.
All right, I'm going to hit you with a couple more Indy questions. Of course, I'll be hitting you with a lot from this point forward. What are your thoughts about the Brickyard 400? I actually attended one of those races.
Here's the thing about the Brickyard. I'm not one of those people that's all like, ditch the Brickyard. We shouldn't be going back there. I understand that some of the racings, I can see why some fans, appear to find those races monotonous. It's hard for stock cars to pass on that track, especially in this current package. But at the same time, and I also very much disagree with what the schedule originally looked like, in the sense that we moved the summer event at Daytona, the July 4th event at Daytona, we moved that to the end of the regular season and moved up Indianapolis to July 4th. I was not a fan of that, because I'm a sucker for tradition, and I loved having the Firecracker 400, the Pepsi 400, the Coke Zero 400, whatever the heck you want to call it. I loved having it on July 4th weekend. It was a perfect tradition, a perfect way to round out the weekend. I don't think Indianapolis has the same sense of legendary status. That doesn't make sense grammatically, but it doesn't have the same sense of lore, the same sense of legend that Daytona on July 4th weekend had. Let's face it, it's an IndyCar track, and that's
right.
perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. Let them have their event. You don't have to hijack a track and move it to a different holiday. So I wasn't a fan of that schedule moving, but at the same time, the Brickyard has produced some exciting races and racing paths. I think it's fine that NASCAR goes back there. I just think they should have stuck with the August event. I think we should continue to go back there. You know, there is a sense of fun. There is a sense of there is a sense of history. You know, it is basically auto racing Valhalla in the sense that, you know, you go there and all forms of racing went there, and, you know, it attracts so many eyes around the world. And, you know, if you can't draw fans, you can't draw fans. But at the same time, I personally am a fan. I personally like going back to it. It's almost like interleague play in the sense that, you know, back in the 90s it was like, oh my God, AL's playing NL, they're racing NASCARs at Indy. But at the same time, now it's just a generally accepted phenomena of the sport. And I think that, you know, at this point, it's so ingrained into our minds, and it's not particularly harming anybody, so why the heck not? Let's keep it up. I say we keep the Brickyard 400. I just say we move it back into August and not on the July 4th.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, not only do I agree with you there, I've actually been to the Daytona race in July, and of course the Daytona 500. So with that said, okay, now that it just came to mind, do you feel that it is good for the Daytona 500 to be the first race since it's at Super Bowl early, or do you think it'd be better with a different date? I know we're talking tradition there, but I've got to get that out.
No, I'm fine with it as the first race this season because, you know, let's face it, as NASCAR fans, they deserve a little holiday right then and there, and Daytona has been that holiday. I think, you know, as we were talking about being a sucker for tradition or not, the one tradition of NASCAR I would probably change. I would certainly want to move the All-Star race around. You have to be like the other sports in that regard because, all due respect to Charlotte, we can't have the All-Star race there every single year. We have to move it to different tracks. You have to let teams, you have to let tracks have their moment in the spotlight and whatnot. So if there's one thing I would change in terms of tradition, I would not change Daytona's opening day. I would keep it. I would have the All-Star race move to different locales every year. That's what I would change.
When they race two races with the Michigan International Speedway, and that's my home track, there's no question they have to have at least two races a year because that's where the auto manufacturers are anyways. What are your thoughts about races being held at the Michigan International Speedway, MIS?
Hey, sure. Why the heck not? It's a fun little detour. I mean, we have the 2 mile track over there. Yeah, I think the big key to this whole thing is at least reducing the 1.5 mile cookie cutters. I think we will see some drastic changes to the schedule in the near future, especially because I read somewhere that the deals at certain tracks are set to expire soon. You know, deals with corporations and whatnot. So I think that we will see some drastic changes to the schedule. We're already starting to see it. You know, Homestead Miami is no longer hosting the final race. That honor, of course, going to Phoenix, and I'm very interested to see how that one turns out. So Michigan's a fun little detour. You know, it's a race that can go by somewhat quickly, you know, 200 laps, 400 miles, and I think it's a fun little detour. It's fun to go there, and look, not what should scream NASCAR more than Motor City, USA, you know, somewhat close to Detroit. I know it's out there in Brooklyn, but at the same time, you know, you go out there, fun little detour, I'm all for it. I think they should keep their events for sure.
So on your bucket list, I've got to assume that you definitely want to go to Indy, whether it's to see an Indy 500 or a Brickyard 400, right?
Oh, of course. Why the heck not? Hey, I'll go to any race if you're paying for it. Why the heck not, right?
Well, that's all right. In your case, you're eligible for a press credential, so you don't have a problem there. So would you say it's a bigger deal winning at Indy or Daytona?
Daytona for sure. Daytona 100%. Because look, that is NASCAR's Valhalla. You win at Daytona, that's like winning the Kentucky Derby in NASCAR pretty much. Like, there are some places where if you win, it just means more. And Daytona is where it means the most. Daytona is the great equalizer on the NASCAR stretch. It's the day where anyone can win, anything can happen, and if you're able to survive the chaos, the destruction we've often seen the final 10 to 20 laps turn into demolition derbies. I mean, this year was no exception. As a matter of fact, I'll never forget, my mother would be coming down watching the races. She would come downstairs, she'd be like, all right, come on, we want to go to dinner. What's going on? I'm like, they're in a red flag right now. I can't go. But she's like, come on now. But I think that Daytona, by far, and obviously that would be reversed if we were talking IndyCar. Indianapolis is a place you want to win. But if you have a trophy from Daytona, it's like your initiation in the sport. It's like you're a legit NASCAR driver. That's what you need. That's your credit right there. You know, like in the movies when the FBI agent flashes his badge, you flash your Daytona trophies. That is where you want to win. You can go the rest of your career without winning a race. As long as you win one at Daytona, you're set.
Oh, yeah.
Just ask Trevor Payne.
Yeah, you're right about that. I mean, being from the Midwest, I would always say if I had a choice to watch a race between Indy or Daytona, obviously I'm an Indianapolis guy, but I can understand it. But having been to both tracks has been pretty good. I got basically two more questions, okay?
All right.
Robbie Gordon, John Andretti, and Danica Patrick happen to race in both the Coca-Cola 600 and the Indy 500. What are your thoughts about being able to do the Memorial Day double dip?
Fantastic. I have much respect for those drivers. And funny story about Robbie Gordon. I was a big Robbie Gordon fan back in the day, and you probably wouldn't expect that, me being a fan of Jeff Gordon back in the day and whatnot. But at the time, my uncle worked for Singular Wireless. Remember them? R.I.P. At the time, my uncle worked for Singular Wireless, and he got into the sport solely so he could talk about it at work and look good for him and whatnot. And I got a lot of Robbie Gordon Singular swag from him. So thank you to my uncle UG. Thank you for that. And so I became a big Robbie Gordon fan. And look, I think that's what people need to realize about NASCAR and auto racing in general, as a matter of fact. This isn't like you going on the highway and driving aimlessly. You need to be in shape, and you need to know how to handle these cars. That takes endurance, that takes strength. And we're going to see that on display on Sunday at the Coca-Cola 600 at Lowe's Motor Speedway. Oh my goodness, I'm aging myself. At Charlotte Motor Speedway. So I think that, I have much respect for those drivers. Tony Stewart was another driver who did that. I think Kurt Busch attempted it one year.
Yeah, you're right. Thanks for filling those in. Tony Stewart was a racer everywhere. Thanks for
Tony did it twice, guys.
Yes. Yes, he did. Yeah. Tony Stewart did it twice, and Kurt Busch attempted it. And I think it's not as prevalent today. I think drivers are. I think it's almost like I'll put it this way: it's the same reason you don't see the road course ringers anymore. Playoffs killed the double dip star because the playoffs made it so. Playoffs killed the Memorial Day 1100 star because playoffs made it so important for you to not only run every race, but you need to have every advantage you can possible. And if you're going to race the Indy 500, that means you would have to start in the back because you'll miss the driver's meeting. So I think that playoffs, while necessary, you're going to see some phenomena that you don't normally see. Like, you're not going to see the road course ringers anymore. So you're not going to see guys like, Boris Said, Ron Fellows, Scott Pruitt. You don't see them anymore because playoffs are so important. You can't miss any races. You need to have your driver in the car and get there at least once. So that all you need to do is win. And you're not going to see drivers attempt the Memorial Day 1100 anymore because it's just so important to have every position, every track position you can, especially in the early going when you're contending for a postseason spot.
Yeah, thanks for bringing Tony Stewart up. He's the one guy that really loved to go both. And I'll tell you what, if he had a choice between winning at Daytona and Indy, full well he'll tell you Indy all day long. But Robbie Gordon's a guy, though, Jeff, I work with. Every time I covered a race at MIS or wherever I went, mainly at MIS, I would talk to Robbie a lot. And one of my favorite people when I was going there was a commentator by the name of Jack Arute as well. Jack was always there. But Robbie Gordon, to me, was a class act. He didn't get the publicity as a lot of guys, but you know what? He's a blue-collar driver in every sense of the word. for sure. And I remember many times where he would invite me into his hauler. We just talked with one another, and we just talked about all kinds of racing. Because not only did he like road courses, but he loved dirt racing. If you want to talk about a dirt race junkie, Robbie Gordon, to me, is certainly one of the ones I look at, for sure. And
that's the thing about Robbie Gordon. He would take any car, no matter the condition, and he would race it.
Oh, yeah.
Look, he got under people's skin. I'm not going to deny that.
Oh, yeah.
He was another type of guy that, embraced the villainous role. But at the same time, he was a racer by every stretch of the imagination. You could take any hunk of junk at there, and he would drive it to the best position he could. He would fight for every position. I remember he had some of his final days on the NASCAR circuit. He was running his own race team, and I remember he would continue to do that. He would get under your skin, but darn it, he was a racer.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think anyone can deny that.
Oh, no, I would not. I love talking to him. He used to tell me the stuff that you're telling me, so he always told me, Scott, you know what? I love racing, any form of racing, and he wasn't looking to make friends. He was, and he shouldn't, because when you're an auto racer, motorsports guy, you're in business for yourself, whether it's sponsors, appearances, whatever, and he was certainly a guy I enjoyed dealing with time in, time out. So let's talk about the past. We know that unlike this year where you have the Indy 500, the Coca-Cola 600, were you more interested in the past about motor racing when you had both of these events going simultaneous?
Hey, sorry, what was that? You kind of went in and out there.
Well, that's okay. In the past, okay, did you really take a liking to having the doubleheader with the Indy 500 and Coca-Cola 600 simultaneously? I know that this is a tradition that we're missing this year, but I think that these two races ideally are paired on the right day. Were you ever interested in this in the past, or you've mainly been more of a NASCAR guy where you never cared as much about the Indy 500?
I mean, I've mostly been an exclusive NASCAR guy. I mean, look, I think the one reason I didn't get into IndyCar in a way, it's the same reason I haven't gotten into things like, Star Trek or Game of Thrones or whatnot. There's a lot of source material to catch up on. And when I get into something, I want to know the ins and outs of it. And I just figured there was, a lot of source material to catch up on. It's like, when you're looking at a show to watch, Star Trek in particular, I feel like, look, I'm a Star Wars geek. I figured I'd love Star Trek. But then you see, like, oh my God, there's 100 episodes of the original series. There's 200 episodes of the next one. But at the same time, it's just a lot of source material to catch up on. So I kind of stuck to NASCAR. I mean, once again, as we discussed, I'm in desperate need of a social life, so you'd figure I'd be all over it. But I got my mind on, I'm trying to learn everything there is to know about NASCAR. So basically, it just seemed like a lot of source material to catch up on.
Oh, it's all right. Hey, listen, I think you've done an impressive job our first night here. I call it NASCAR night, and the timing of this could not have been any better to have you between Darlington and the Coca-Cola 600. See, I'm thinking ahead. Giving them 100 miles they probably shouldn't have had. I know we've covered a lot of different bases and all. David, you have anything else you want to ask Geoff?
No, the only thing that I wanted to know was, because I brought this up with another show, NASCAR wants the fans to be involved. And we talked about the fact that they've done such a great job of doing broadcasting without the fans there that you wouldn't know that anything else changed. NASCAR is also an expensive sport as far as getting tickets and staying power, and people come in for the weekends and they bring their campers and they want to go on the infield starting Thursday. Is NASCAR going to adjust some of its costs to the fans, knowing the economy has changed? Do you see that happening as well to try and keep the fans entertained and bringing them back?
Frankly, I think that's a better question for NASCAR itself. But at the same time, I think we will see some adjustments. Like, for example, I think we will see more races at least go by the inverted starting lineup. We saw that on Wednesday night. And, we saw Ryan Preece, the 20th place finisher on Sunday, star on the pole next to Ty Dillon, the 19th place finisher on Sunday. I think we will see more of that, and that would cut costs down a little bit. I think that we'll see things like, we will see shorter races. I think we'll see weeknight races too, where in the sense that, you don't have to drive so far. We could see, weekly double headers in the sense that, we'll have one race on Sunday and we'll have another on Wednesday night. And the Wednesday night races could easily be go by the kilometers, as we saw on Wednesday. And Wednesday's race went 500 kilometers, and that usually accounts for the number in the title usually goes by the number of miles, of course. So I think that those are two cost-cutting moves that we'll see, and I think they could continue to become more prevalent. I think we saw some positive reviews, too. I think Dale Earnhardt Jr. himself talked about how much he enjoyed the inverted order, and I thought that was pretty cool. I think, who said it yesterday? I think it was either Denny Hamlin or Kyle Busch said yesterday that it was nice to see some guys up front that we don't normally get to see, race up front. And it goes back to what we were talking about before a little bit with the stage racing, when Ryan Preece held off Bubba Wallace for the 20th position, passed him with 3 laps to go in Sunday's race, and essentially won the pole for Wednesday. So, unfortunately, that didn't translate to Wednesday's event, and which stinks too. You figured you have a tied car in the 30s, you would be set at Darlington, a la Ricky Craven. But at the same time, I think that I think it's for the better. I think it's for the better, and those are two cost-cutting moves we could certainly see in the future.
Jeff, I remember many years ago, once again, another before your time, the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets played a announcerless game on TV. Brian Dumble was the guy at halftime. And boy, I give NBC credit for experimenting, but that was one experiment which was a one and done. So, but that was just unreal. I don't think you'll ever see cost cutting when it comes to announcers. You truly valued what a play-by-play title was back then. So, what that? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think in terms of announcing, I thought one trend I'm glad has been kind of curtailed, but we might see it come back in the future, especially if we start to play things at that event and as we continue to social distance. I remember that, there was talks about, I think ESPN3 started doing this, NFL Network did too with some of their preseason games, to call events remotely. So I think that's certainly something you can see. Heck, we're seeing it right now, like we've been talking about with Mike and Geoff. They do a fantastic job. I certainly hope that doesn't become the norm, but at the same time, if it helps get the ball rolling in terms of sports coming back, let's see what we can do.
You know what? That's an interesting point. We'll end it on that note. So here's what we're going to do right now, okay, Geoff? You had an opportunity to introduce yourself, so what I'd like you to do for our fans out there is I want to let everybody know how they can contact you and all of the information, promotion, or whatever you want. And then David will go on, and then I'll wrap up, and then we'll have our closing thoughts about how they get a hold of us. So, Geoff, we're so glad you came on the broadcast tonight. Certainly look forward to working with you. Good first act. So why don't you let our listeners know how they can reach you?
Yeah, for sure. The primary way to get in touch with me, follow me on Twitter. It's at Geoff J. Mags, and I should warn you, the Geoff is spelled Geoff, much like the famous giraffe spokesperson, the famous spokes giraffe of the same name over at Toys R Us. So GeoffJMags. Follow me on Twitter. We can start a conversation. Feel free to talk to me. Feel free to follow me, read my work, and start a debate reasonably, of course. But happy to have you guys come on. It's at Geoff J. Mags. You can follow me on Instagram as well, at Geoff Mags. No J in that one. But looking forward to working with you guys. Looking forward to anyone who follows me from this from these shenanigans, and looking forward to just keeping up the good work, like we were saying, doing what we can with what we got.
Well, folks, I actually met Geoff on Twitter, so I got news for you. I was glad that you reached out to me, and now I'm glad that not only did we reach out on Twitter, but LinkedIn as well. So I'm thrilled that I'm working with you. Okay, David, go ahead.
Hey guys, if you want to follow, I am cover the Jacksonville Jaguars on Sandsided. I am at blackandteal.com. I also cover the Miami Marlins on marlinmaniacs.com. I'm on Twitter at DM719907, and I am the co-host of 108 Sixes here with Scott.
You sure are. You're the jack of all trades and probably getting close to master of them all as well. In terms of my getting a hold of us, I have 2 Twitter accounts. One is Scoop, SCOOP, 33333. Count up to 5. Then you have a 5 of a kind, which is a good hand in poker. If you're not looking the poker route, you can do the business route at Tribune South. You can also reach out to me on Facebook, the South Florida Tribune. Like the page, you get updates there. Instagram, South Florida Tribune Gets It Done. YouTube channel, South Florida Tribune Gets It Done. In hockey, they call it a hat trick. The website, www.southfloridatribune.com. Email, southfloridatribune@gmail.com. LinkedIn, my name is Scott Morganoff. I'll be more than happy to go ahead and connect with you there. You are listening to the Sports Exchange on the World Sports and News Network, WSAN. And yes, this is the Sports Exchange. Our other shows on the broadcast include the South Florida Tribune Podcast, which is a local broadcast in town, 108 Stitches Baseball Talk, where indeed I do go ahead and co-host it with David Levin, The Real and the Rare by Xavier McKnight, Fantasy Football with myself and Ryan Spurwood, Motorman and Rude Dog, and our newest show, Jeff, is called No Limits. Okay, so if you have any off-the-wall things you want to talk about, you're always welcome to come on there. You can catch these broadcasts that we're affiliated with through Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, CastBox, Podcast Addict, Deezer, and Podchaser. If you can count to 9, then you got Gordie Howe's number, Bobby Hall, and a lot of other great people that wore the number 9. Don't know about the NASCAR one. If anybody would know, it would be Jeff. But meanwhile, Jeff, once again, we've appreciated having you on the broadcast tonight. It's been a lot of fun. And all we hope that everybody will do is follow, subscribe, and listen to the broadcast. And all of us want to wish you a happy Memorial Day weekend, folks. And we hope we had the opportunity to go out there and give you great entertainment, especially as you go into a major race week, whether you had the Indy 500 or not, Coca-Cola 600. We feel like we've given you a lot of information. I want to end it on a final note here, that is we hope everybody stay safe, stay at home, practice social distancing, and kudos to our first responders and our frontliners, because right now this pandemic is far from over. But like Jeff mentioned before, having NASCAR back live is certainly a great start. So on behalf of Geoff Magliocchette, my name is Scott Morganroth, and David Levin wishing you a good night, and thanks for joining us here on the Sports Exchange and the WSAN Network. Good night, everybody.